If you speak Cantonese, Cabo Verdean Creole, Haitian Creole, Spanish, Mandarin, or Vietnamese, and you prefer to listen to the meeting in the language you use, we're going to set up interpretation. So you'll press the interpretation button to join the relevant audio channel. So let's start with Cantonese.
係，大家好。如果你今日係需要廣東話翻譯嘅時候咧，你應該見到個地球儀示咧，就揀入去揀廣東話個圖標，就會到廣東話嘅翻譯頻道噶啦。咁咧，我哋有其他語言嘅翻譯嘅喎，亦都有呢個嘅海地語啦，亦都有國語，亦都有係呢個其他嘅語言嘅。好，唔該晒。
Thank you, Anna. And we can move on to Cabo Verdean Creole.
Ok. A reunião também fica gravado. Se você falar os outros idiomas, crioulo, você marca, escolhe no botão onde está a interpretação para poder entrar na reunião, no canal áudio relevante. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Marita. Haitian Creole. Esther, do you want to?
Bonsoir tout le monde. Et nous avons une réunion ça que nous fait à soir et réunion en rencontre là avant enregistrer. Et si que par exemple, vous avez parlé cantonese ou parlé créole Cap-Vert ou bien parlé créole haïtien, espagnol, mandarin ou bien vietnamese ou tu as préféré tendre réunion ça que nous avons là dans la langue utilisée, ou capable peser bouton pour capable et joindre audio qui est capable de entendre réunion en langue ouverte. Merci.
Thank you. Claudio, Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes. Hoy tendremos servicio de interpretación, pero antes de eso recordándoles que esta reunión está siendo grabada. Para tener acceso a la interpretación, como siempre, usted vaya al icono de la parte de abajo de la pantalla de Zoom y le clica ahí para unirse al canal español. Si está en una tableta o en un celular, lo encuentran los 3 puntos en la parte izquierda de arriba de la pantalla. Gracias. Si tiene cualquier dificultad técnica, háganos saber, por favor, en el chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Terry, Mandarin.
嗨，大家好，我是 Terry， 我是你们的国语翻译。待会你在屏幕下方会看到一个地球仪的图标，你点选地球仪的图标，然后再选择 Mandarin， 就可以听到国语的频道了。如果是用手机或者平板电脑上来的话呢，可以点击屏幕下方的3个点，然后再选择翻译功能，也可以听到国语的频道。我们今天有好几种不同的语言，大家可以选择相应的语言。谢谢大家 ，Thank you。
Thank you. Vanya, Vietnamese. Vanya, you ready?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Xin chào, đây là thông dịch viên tiếng Việt. Nếu bạn muốn nói tiếng Quảng Đông, Cabo Verdean Creole, Tây Ban Nha, Quan thoại Việt và bạn muốn nghe của họ bằng ngôn ngữ mình sử dụng, hãy nhấn nút phiên dịch là quả cầu, hình quả cầu để tham gia kênh âm thanh bằng tiếng Quảng Đông, Cabo Verdean Creole, Tây Ban Nha, Quan thoại hoặc là tiếng Việt. Thì trong trường hợp này là quý vị cần tiếng Việt thì bấm vào cái quả cầu rồi sau đó chọn ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt. Xin cảm ơn.
Thank you to all of our wonderful interpreters. I just started interpretation, so to our participants, you're welcome to join an interpretation channel now. All right. So your microphones are turned off to start. You will need to unmute to speak. If you're joining by phone, you can press *6 to unmute. You can also raise your hand or leave a message in the chat box if you have a question. And if you called into the meeting by phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. So our agenda for tonight, we're going to have a brief presentation. Then we'll have some time for questions and answers, and then we'll divide up into breakout rooms to review sites and give feedback. And if you joined one of the previous in-person open houses that we had, either at the Civic Pavilion, on City Hall Plaza, or at Copley Library, the content in the meeting is the same. And now I will pass it to Kim.
All right. Hello, everyone. We're really happy to be talking with you all and looking forward to hearing your feedback on the potential sites for our Bluebikes expansion. So first of all, some introductions. My name is Kim Foltz. I'm the director of Boston Bikes. We are a small team in the Streets Cabinet, the city of Boston, and we're responsible for our public bike share system, Bluebikes, as well as bike parking, and then a whole array of community programs connected or related to biking. So what we're doing tonight at tonight's open house, we are going to provide a little bit of background information about the need for expanding our bike share system and the analysis that's gone into this project up till now. Then we're gonna, as Louisa said, we're gonna break into some smaller groups by geography so that you have a chance to see some of the potential sites that we have identified and provide comments back to us. So we're really looking for input from all of you on what sites are going to be the best for the different neighborhoods. So just a little bit of background about our bike share system. Today, the system is operating in 13 different municipalities. There's 450 plus stations throughout the entire system. About 270 or so of those are in the city of Boston. There are about 4,500 bikes throughout the system, and the vast majority of those, it's actually, I think, even more than 2,000 of those bikes are owned by Boston. And the system includes about 750 e-bikes, which were introduced at the very end of last year in 2023. So as I said, the system is, we really consider it public transportation. It is owned by each of the municipalities and operates in 13 different municipalities. We all have contracts with an operator to run the system on our behalf. That operator is Lyft. Lyft Bikes and Scooters is the division of Lyft. We have a title sponsor that provides financial support for the system. That's Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. That's why the name is Bluebikes. And well, I think I've said it, I sound like a broken record, but the system is owned by the municipalities. So one thing that we really like to emphasize early on, equity and removing barriers to bike share for residents in the city of Boston, particularly for our lower income residents, has long been a priority for us. We have had some kind of a discounted membership option since the launch of bike share in 2011. Last year in 2023, almost a year ago, Mayor Wu announced a new discounted program for Boston residents. And there's two components of this. One, we have a $5 annual membership for any resident of the city of Boston who meets income guidelines. And then for any Boston resident who doesn't meet income guidelines but is new to bike share. So if you haven't had a membership in the last 3 years, you can get access to the system for $60 a year. And both of those memberships provide unlimited number of trips. You have a free ride time with every trip. So it really is a great way to get around the city. So speaking of all of those trips, there are millions of trips taken on bike share every year. We are coming up very soon on our 25th million trip since bike share launched. in Boston, last year there were nearly 2 million trips. That's just in the city of Boston's portion of the bike share system. System-wide, it was about 3.6 million. And more than a third of those trips in Boston started in the South End and the downtown neighborhoods that we're talking about here tonight. So this is the area where we see the highest demand for bike share and just the heaviest volume of trips. So we've worked really hard over the last 6 or 7 years to really expand our bike share system in significant ways. Our long-term transportation plan, which was released in 2017, called for bike share to be within a 10-minute walk of every household in Boston. This is what the map looked like in 2017. So we clearly had a long way to go in basically the southern half of the city had yet to be reached by bike share. Today, it looks pretty different. So we do have bike share in every neighborhood of the city, and about 89% of households are within that 10-minute walk. So we're getting close to that sort of broad citywide goal. However, we know that there are many ways in which the system is still not working very well. So when we think about expanding the system today in 2024, we really think about kind of two different types of stations, two different sets of needs, if you will. So first of all, what we call infill stations. So really looking at how do we fill in the gaps, the existing gaps in the network, and really meet the demand that we can really see where the system is just not keeping up with the number of trips that people would like to take on bike share. And we'll get into what that demand looks like and how we analyze that. And then the second kind of expansion or type of stations that we think about are as expansion. So really sort of increasing that access, getting closer to that 100%, and really building more of a network around the edges of the current network. So you might have seen on that map on the last slide that going into West Roxbury, say, or Hyde Park, it's really just the beginning of a spine. So that doesn't provide very good access to those neighborhoods. So with this expansion, we want to make sure that we're filling out that network much better in those neighborhoods. So thinking about, in particular, the infill stations, we did a whole lot of data analysis and worked very closely with our analytics team here in the city of Boston. We looked at things like population density and job density. We know that these things are very closely tied to the number of trips that stations see in a given area.
I muted someone who joined late.
Great. So you can move on to the next slide. What we see is that in the areas that have that high level of job and population density, really our goal is to have bike share within a 3-minute walk. That's so that we really are much better able to keep up with the demand and have bikes and docks available when people need them. But this map illustrates areas that are in light red. Those are areas that are a 3 to 5 minute walk from an existing station, and the dark red is over a 5-minute walk from a station. And one thing that we know in just transportation planning generally is when you get much beyond a 3-minute walk to something, it becomes much less sort of convenient. People are less likely to utilize it. So we really are looking to sort of get into this threshold in all of our high demand areas. So one of the other data points that we used, points of analysis, was this notion of lost trips. So it's basically an estimate of how many trips didn't happen because there weren't bikes available or there weren't docks available. We also did sort of a, you know, the reverse of lost trips, like how many people were like unable to dock a bike. And the way that we get at this number is by, we have all of the instances when a station like this one here is empty or full and how long that lasted. So we can sort of take that those numbers and combine them with the volume of trips that you typically see at a given station and come up with some sort of estimates of how many lost trips there were. If the station had had infinite number of bikes, what would those trips have been like? So what we found was that in almost all of the neighborhoods that we're talking about tonight, so Beacon Hill, Bay Village, Chinatown, downtown, the North End, and then parts of the South End, they are experiencing the very high numbers of lost trips. So this map here has the colors that are more in the reds and yellows and oranges. Those are the highest number of lost trips. The size of the circles is indicative of the volume of trips, so the total number of trips at that given station. So I am going to pass it on to Louisa so she can share a little bit more about how we are going about the planning and the public engagement process for this expansion.
Thank you, Kim. So this is a big project. We are adding 100 new stations. And so we're doing the work in phases. We actually started this work last fall. In phase 1, we added 8 new stations in Mattapan and Dorchester to support the Red Line shutdown. And this was kind of rapid response. So now that we have more time, we're being more planful and doing community engagement. So we're currently in phase 2. We're aiming to add 42 stations this fall. And in phase 3, next year, spring, early summer, we'll aim to add the final 50. So we've split the current phase into 2 parts, and we're in the first part of that phase, phase 2A, South End, Chinatown, Beacon Hill, Downtown, West End, North End, and Wharf District. So we are in our community engagement period now, which we kicked off in July, and we'll be wrapping up at the end of this month. And then in September, we'll start moving into installation. And we're planning to install 5 to 7 new stations in the South End and 17 to 22 in the rest of the area in this phase. In September, we're going to kick off community engagement for phase 2B. That's South Boston, the waterfront, Charlestown, and East Boston. And then we're aiming to install those stations at the end of 2024. So this is our 3rd open house for this phase. Oops, I always forget to change. So today, on July 22nd, we were in the Civic Pavilion. July 30th, we were at Copley Library. And then tonight is our virtual open house. We opened surveys in early July. You can find them at boston.gov/bike-share-survey. And we've posted signs and flyers, and I apologize, this is also not updated. We have posted signs and flyers at all of the potential locations. So let's see, we've done a lot of other outreach as well. We've sent a lot of emails. We've been working with civic organizations and our Office of Neighborhood Services liaisons, but just wanted to give a quick overview. So what's next for us? We are going to consider all the comments we've received by email from these open houses and from the surveys. We'll narrow down the list of sites. So as you'll see later, we have more sites, potential sites proposed than we'll actually install. And then we need to do some work to finalize the actual locations and get permits if they're, particularly if they're not on City of Boston owned property. We will, I'm just checking to make sure that I'm not speaking too fast. Okay. Then we will need to execute license agreements with other property owners. So we wanted to share a little bit about what goes into finding good sites. So number one, a site should be visible. We can't have it like tucked away in some tiny little side street that no one travels on. We want it to be front and center, the places where people are going. So this is a great example right in front of Copley Library. The sites need to be clear of utilities. So the base plates cannot be on a manhole or a handhole. The bikes can, because those are movable. The stations need to be easy to service. So we need to have a space for the Bluebikes van to pull over so they can repair stations, rebalance bikes, things like that. For every station, we must leave enough room for pedestrians if they're on the sidewalk. So we have a minimum of 5 to 6 feet that must be left clear for pedestrians to walk. Sunny. So the kiosks are charged by solar panels. So we look for sites that get at least 4 hours of sunlight a day. And finally, we like to find sites where people want to go. So as you might know, some Bluebike stations are on the sidewalk or on plazas. They're off street. As I mentioned, there needs to be 5 to 6 feet at least of pedestrian clearance. And then there also needs to be clearance on the other side of the station if it's up against a parking lane so that people have room to open their car doors or get out of the passenger side. Stations can also be in street in the parking lane. So they can either pull out towards the curb or out into the street, as you can see in these two images. And, we make that choice depending on the type of street and also the handholds and manholes. So a station with 15 docks for bikes takes up the same space as about 2 car parking spaces. Many of our stations are on City of Boston property, but we also do install stations on property that the city doesn't own. That can be private or it can be public, like other agencies. Sometimes it's really hard to tell who owns what. So this picture is a great example of like the sidewalk looks seamless, but half of that is private and half is public. And as mentioned, we'll work with state agencies, MBTA, DCR, MassDOT. So they still have to kind of agree and sign legal documents, and all of that does take time. So we're going to, that's what we've got for our presentation. We're gonna pivot to question and answer period now. So feel free to raise your hand. You can kind of see where that lives on your options bar, or you can type in the chat. And then once we're done with questions and answers, we'll switch to the breakout rooms where you'll actually be able to review sites and share comments on specific sites. Note, you can review sites and give comments on them at any time on the survey. So that's boston.gov/bike-share-survey. You can get to it from the main project page, which I included below. And you can also reach us at any time by email. There's our email address that goes right to me and Kim. So Yeah, I think maybe I'll stop sharing now. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but folks should feel free to put questions in the chat or raise their hand and we can answer them.
So I see a question about interaction with bike lanes as a factor in location. It's certainly something that we take into consideration, but it's not, we wouldn't exclude a location because it isn't immediately accessible by a bike lane. We would only, maybe exclude a location if there was like literally nowhere that you could, ride safely on a bike. And then if a location blocks a bike lane, yeah, we would not put a station in a way that blocks a bike lane. Very occasionally there's like coordination issues that happened on Cambridge Street when the Cambridge Street near the Whole Foods went in the West End, and we hadn't yet gotten our station relocated, Cambridge and Joy. So it was temporarily blocking the brand new bike lane, but that was not an intentional or long-term condition. And if ever you see a station blocking a bike lane, we would ask you to let us know, please. Hopefully that is not the case.
Michael, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hello. Yeah, so I was wondering if, because it sounds like you guys are deciding a lot of locations based off of those lost trips. So I was wondering if you also considered expanding existing stations in addition to adding new ones.
Yes, for sure. So we do look at opportunities to add to existing stations. We have done a lot of that already. But it's not to say that there is not a station out there that there's not sort of additional space or we could add. And sometimes like we'll add a plate to a station. So we did a whole lot of expansion of existing stations when the Orange Line shut down 2 summers ago. And so stations along the Orange Line corridor, anywhere we could find space, we added a plate or two. And then sometimes, we'll go back a couple years later and find like, geez, we should have added 3 plates instead of 1 plate. So there's some of that. But we certainly, welcome suggestions if there's a station that you use and it seems like there's additional space there. You can flag that for us. We've got a lot of stations that we're responsible for, so we certainly don't get it all right.
And was that kind of considered in this? Because I know you guys get to add 100 stations, which is awesome. But it kind of in your analysis, did you look at, well, could expanding this station actually be better than adding another one, or are you just kind of trying to find homes for all the new stations that you get to add?
I would say there's some art to it. There's like 100 stations, but how big a station is, we have tried to standardize on a station being at least 19 docks, but sometimes it's really hard to find that 52 feet, which is what we need for a standard 19 dock station, but maybe there's space for a 15 dock station. That's the smallest size we'll have, that we will put in. And so, it's not like there is one standard thing that is a station, which means that we have a little bit of flexibility to add 2 existing stations, with add another plate that has 4 docks or another 2 plates or something. And so it's certainly a cheaper option for us to expand existing stations because the most expensive equipment is the kiosk and the ad panel. So if those things are already there, just popping down one additional plate and 4 more docks is not that big a deal. So I don't know if that answered your question that well, but we would love to add capacity to existing stations wherever we're able to in these high demand areas anyway.
Thank you.
And I'll just read Edward's comment in the chat. Where will the new stations in South Boston be? I think that's the Curley Center, Medal of Honor Park, Joe Moakley Park, and other locations along the beach would be excellent locations. Thanks for your time tonight. Thank you, Edward. So we are going to soon kind of kick off community engagement for South Boston, Charlestown, East Boston, and the Seaport. And so we'll be sharing sites in a similar way for this phase. We'll have open houses, we'll have a survey. We are definitely looking at all of those locations that you mentioned. Let's see, was someone raising their hand? Looks like they put it down. Oh, same question for the Hyde Park area. So Hyde Park is going to be in phase 3, which will happen in 2025. So we'll be sharing more information this winter around what community engagement will look like for Hyde Park and what sites there are to review.
So there was a question from Nancy in the chat. When you assumed empty stations would have had more users, how did you compute the multiples so you could tell if there were in fact more potential users? So I'll try to answer that as best I can. I'm not the analytics person, but so it's basically, so if you take a station, let's say Charles Circle, it's one of our busiest stations, and you can see the volume of trips over the course of a typical day, and the patterns tend to change from one day to the next. So a Monday might look very different from a Saturday. So you can sort of start to make some assumptions about what the when there are bikes available, what the pattern of trips look like. And they tend to follow curves too. So, trips will go up until a certain part of the day, and then they go down, and then they pick up again, that kind of thing. So then we've got these instances when that station at Charles Circle was empty, and it might have been empty for 2.5 hours on a Monday, and then one bike showed up, and then it immediately disappeared, and then it was empty again for another hour, whatever. So we've got this very detailed actual information about when any given station was empty or full. And so taking the assumptions that we make over lots and lots and lots of trip data and patterns at a given station, and then applying these instances when a station was empty, then you can start to make some pretty valid assumptions about what would have happened had there been bikes there. And this actually was, the methodology for calculating these lost trips was derived by not our own analytics team. Even they did, some research into how other, academics and statistician type people, have really dug into this question and being able to understand trip demand in bike share systems.
All right, we got some questions in the chat. So every time I go by Metropolitan Ave and Hyde Park Square near the post office, it does not appear these bikes are being used. Kim, do you want to?
Sure. Very possibly true. that we don't see the demand. We don't see the usage rate in areas like Hyde Park, anything close to what we see in, say, downtown Boston. A lot of that is because we've just barely built. We have not built a network in Hyde Park. We've built just the beginning of just as I said before, kind of a spine. So just a couple stations in the neighborhood. There's not very many destinations that you can get to easily by bike share. And most people in Hyde Park do not live within an easy walking distance of a station. So that means that it's not convenient to very many people in Hyde Park. And what we've seen in other areas of the city, in East Boston, for example, where I live, when we first put in some stations in the neighborhood, but we didn't have very many, they were a pretty low usage rate. But as we built out the network, and the network became much more useful to places that people wanted to get in the neighborhood, and also like anywhere that you live in East Boston, almost, not entirely, but you're within a relatively short distance, we started seeing those trip volume go up. So we know that at least one piece of it is making sure that we build out that network and provide that access and make it convenient. There's other things though that we that contribute to how much people use the stations and use the network. Reaching people, helping our residents know that there are membership options available at pretty affordable prices is something that we're working really hard at right now. And if for a lot of people, the way that they hear about bike share and learn about it is it pops up in their neighborhood. So if you had never heard about bike share before and you live in Hyde Park, like that station at the Hyde Square post office might have been the first time that you kind of encountered it. The station itself is more optimized for people who are the signage on the station itself is optimized for people who are just taking a day trip or taking a single trip. And the pricing doesn't make sense if you want to do that on a regular basis, because each trip is costing you close to $3. So like I don't want to pay $3 every time I take a bike trip. And so we know that getting that messaging out there to people about the membership options and the Boston Bikes Pass being a deeply discounted annual membership is really important. So it's something that we are also working hard at. And we think in combination, those things will really help increase the usage in places like Hyde Park.
All right, another data question. Do you consider completely full stations to be as much of a problem as empty stations, or are regularly empty stations more of a priority?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in some ways, completely full stations are more of a problem in that it's a problem for the user. It makes the person with the bike trying to return the bike very unhappy, and with good reason, because you're arriving at your destination and you can't find a place to lock it up. And so now you need to go to the next closest station. And if that next closest station is half a mile away, now you're really unhappy, and bike share is really not very convenient for you. So it is less of a measure of demand, like how much demand we're sort of missing out on, but it is more of a measure of how successful is our system at really providing convenient transportation by bike for our residents and our workers and our visitors. So we absolutely did use data about when stations were full, as well as when stations were empty, in doing our analysis about where the pain points were in our network.
All right, another question from Colin. In locating a station, do you take into account the likelihood that users will ride the wrong way on a one-way street that the station is located in? Because riding the wrong way for a block or two could save a lot of time for the rider, even if unlawful, and creating a safety hazard for drivers and pedestrians.
That's a good question. I'm guessing you have a particular street in mind, which we know that we do know streets where there's a lot of one-way or wrong way riding. And I guess I'd say, yeah, we take the broader context into consideration, for sure. But we also work in close partnership with our colleagues elsewhere in the streets cabinet who are doing work to expand our bike network. And ultimately, these two things really work close together, or it's sort of ultimately it's a virtuous circle. That's how we see it. We know that we've got lots of data out there on traffic counts by vehicle type, and pedestrian counts and things like that on lots of key corridors in the city. And we utilize those things to really understand how we need to better build out our bike network to meet those needs. And then meanwhile, our team does a lot of work to on bike safety education, helping share with people the rules of the road, and things like that, to make sure that we're really getting the message out there about how to safely share the road with other users.
Awesome. All right. Catching up. Question. Do you consider any relocation of existing stations to fully optimize the combined existing plus new locations? Seems just adding up the existing network would be less optimal than reconsidering all locations.
Sorry, I'm rereading that question.
Yes.
Because I got distracted by an earlier one.
I wish we had our data analytics.
Yeah,
here.
did you consider fully? So no, is the short answer to that question. So there's maybe implicit in our explanation of these sort of two different typologies of stations, the infill stations and the expansion stations, is so with the expansion stations and the sort of broader goal of the Go Boston 2030 long-term transportation plan, is what we really see as an obligation to provide equitable access to bike share throughout the city, kind of regardless of if the ridership is there today. It is a public transportation system. It's public transportation by bike. And so just because we don't have a lot of riders in somewhere like Hyde Park, doesn't mean that we shouldn't build the network there. We shouldn't provide that access. One thing that I do know for certain is if we do not provide the access, if we don't build out the network, then no one will ride in Hyde Park if we don't have access there. And so it's not simply an exercise of optimizing for where the demand is highest. If I'm understanding your question correctly. It is this sort of more nuanced balancing act of, on the one hand, really looking at where are the existing pain points in our system and addressing those pain points. So that's what this infill looks like. And you know, I mean, I guess you could argue that we could reallocate some stations within that, within the sort of high demand neighborhoods, to better meet that need. And in, you know, full transparency, we did not do that. But so it's this balancing act between that and then making sure that we're really building out at least a minimally viable network so that every resident in the city who wants to be able to get around by bike share has the ability to do that.
Awesome. All right, I think we have time for one more, if there is one more, and then we'll move into breakout rooms. Cool. All right, let me pull up this screen again. So we're gonna move into breakout rooms now. There's gonna be 3 breakout rooms by neighborhood. And so when you review sites, we want you to think about questions like, where do you travel to or from in this area? What do you like? What do you dislike about the site? What might you know about the site that we might not know? Those are all wonderful things that we would love to hear. So in a few minutes, you'll have the opportunity to choose a breakout room. One will focus on sites downtown, Bay Village, Beacon Hill, Chinatown, Wharf District. One will be West End and North End, and then one will be the South End. We're gonna pause after about 20 minutes in each room. There'll be a message across everyone's screen prompting us to switch rooms if you'd like to view sites in a different neighborhood. But you know, if we get through all the sites before 20 minutes are up and you want to jump into another room, feel free. It can be more informal. Hold on, I'm just checking. All right. We want to remind you that all of these sites are already online on a survey. There's 3 different surveys, one for each of those. You know, they follow the lines of the breakout rooms. And so if you don't want to stick around on this meeting, that's totally fine. You can log off, jump on the survey, review the sites on your own, and give comments that way. That is always an option. If you speak a language other than English, don't join a breakout room because the interpretation channels don't work in breakout rooms. You can stay in the main room and we'll help you get connected with an interpreter. Please note the survey is available in all 6 of our languages available this evening. So that's also an option. You can just take the survey on your own. Let me just check the chat. Jake, thanks for dropping those links. So again, here are the breakout rooms, and Dan will put those options up on your screen soon. So feel free to choose the room that you'd like. And I'm going to join my breakout room now, so we'll lose the screen. But thanks all for coming, and hope to see you in a room.